Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Boost Your Practice Positive Experiences and Growth in Child Welfare webinar, where we are going to be going over the new STARS Booster course that will soon be available through the FICW. Thank you to everyone for joining us. My name is Zoe Leonarzik, and I am part of the Florida Institute for Child Welfare as our lead learning experience designer. I will be your host today, but our presenter today is Marina Cameron. Marina is the program manager at Florida State University's Institute for Trauma and Resilience Studies. She develops research-based training programs for professionals across disciplines with expertise in trauma-informed care and resilience. Her work focuses on addressing adverse childhood experiences, supporting survivors of violence, and advancing neuro-informed practices within social service systems. Before I finally pass the mic off to our wonderful presenter, I have just a couple more housekeeping items to go over. Feel free to use the chat to send any questions that you may have and participate as we go through this presentation. However, we will spend some time at the end of the webinar answering those questions or any questions that remain, and if you so wish, you will have the option to turn on your mic to ask questions. We are also joined by Bethany Bobo, who is going to be in the background of this webinar, just monitoring for any technical issues and addressing those as quickly as possible. And with that, that is enough for me, and I will pass it off to our presenter.
Thank you so much, Zoe. I am very happy to be here with you all today. For many of you, you might be familiar with the STARS course, the Strength, Trauma, and Resilience Studies course. Essentially, what the STARS Booster course is it's exactly that. It's a little bit of an extra boost after taking this course, and it helps enhance your skills and also your practice. So before we get started, I'd love to hear where you're joining from and maybe just one word that describes how you feel about your work today. If you feel comfortable, go ahead and drop that in the chat. So I always like to say that these sessions are always more meaningful when we can connect with each other, even virtually. So I encourage you to not be shy. This is a space where we can be real and kind of reflect together. So in the original STARS certification, we focused heavily on adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs, and their impact on development, relationships, and well-being. This booster course kind of shifts our attention toward the other side of the story, so what protects children. Positive childhood experiences, or PCE, we call PACEs, remind us that even when adversity exists, there are things that buffer children from its effects. So small, consistent, positive experiences can literally reshape the trajectory of a child's life. So today we're going to explore how we can intentionally build and nurture those protective factors in our daily work. We're going to dive into 3 important topics that build on what you learned in STARS: positive childhood experiences, post-traumatic growth, and compassion satisfaction. These all tie together to help us understand not just how trauma affects children, but also how healing, growth, and connection happen for them, but also for us as professionals. So let's start by shifting our lens from what's gone wrong to what can go right. In child welfare, we see a lot of hard situations, right? And sometimes it can feel like our work is all about minimizing harm or preventing further trauma. And that's important work, right? But there's another layer to it: creating and supporting moments of connection and joy that actually build resilience. Those moments, that's what positive childhood experiences is all about. So you might think of adverse childhood experiences and positive childhood experiences as 2 sides of the same coin. ACEs focus on what hurts a child, so things like neglect, abuse, or instability, whereas PACEs focus on what heals a child, things that support their physical, emotional, and social well-being. So, research shows that when children have more positive experiences, it actually helps reduce the impact of adverse experiences. So, a child who has been through trauma, but also has strong, consistent, and caring relationships is far more likely to heal and thrive. And it's not about pretending that the bad didn't happen. It's really actually about recognizing that good experiences can coexist with the hard, and that they can build resilience over time. So here's the really hopeful part. Even for kids who have experienced four or more ACEs, which we know is linked to higher risks of poor physical and mental health, positive childhood experiences can actually buffer those effects. In a 2021 study, they found that children who felt safe, loved, and supported showed significantly better long-term health outcomes, even if they had experienced trauma. So essentially, the takeaway from this is we can't always erase adversity, right? But we can strengthen the protective layers around a child through meaningful everyday interactions. So when we're talking about PACEs, we're not just talking about feel good moments, we're talking about neuroscience. Positive experiences activate the brain's reward and safety systems. They help regulate stress, support secure attachment, and build social emotional skills. So, in other words, these experiences help rewire a child's nervous system to expect connection rather than danger. Studies have found that even small, repeated positive moments, for example, things like praise or laughter or a consistent bedtime story, can actually shift a child's physiological responses to stress, right? Those automatic responses to stress. So every safe, warm, or validating interaction truly does matter in a child's life. It's building new neural pathways that promote healing. So we might make this a little personal for a second. What are some examples of positive childhood experiences that you've seen or that you've helped create? For example, maybe it's a child feeling seen by their caseworker or a caregiver showing up to every visit on time or a bedtime routine that helps a child feel safe finally. If you feel comfortable, go ahead and share a few of those ideas in the chat. I really love hearing your real life examples because I think they help remind us that positive change doesn't always come from like very large gestures. It often comes from really small and consistent acts of care. So feel free if you're open to it to share or just reflect on your own experiences. So some examples of positive childhood experiences can include feeling safe and cared for by at least one consistent adult, having a caregiver who listens, believes, and supports them, spending time with peers in positive and structured settings, being recognized for small achievements or progress, having family routines like meals or reading together, opportunities for creative expression. Maybe that's through play or art or movement, and predictable rules and boundaries that feel fair and caring. What I love about these examples is just how simple they really are. They don't require special funding or new programs, right? It's just intentionality at its core. So many of you are already creating these experiences every day, sometimes just by how you show up or how you listen, right? Or how you notice a child's strengths. So, how do we translate this into our work? Start by thinking about the environments and relationships you influence, whether it's with children directly or with caregivers, schools, or different programs. We can help build paces by creating safe and predictable spaces, by teaching life skills that build confidence, encouraging communication and input from the kids themselves, promoting healthy routines and fair boundaries, offering emotional guidance and consistent feedback. All of these practices reinforce this trust and safety, and those are the foundation of resilience. Remember that every interaction, every single interaction is an opportunity to build or rebuild the sense of safety in children. So let's look at a brief little example. When Mila entered foster care, her new caregivers noticed how much she loved to draw. With guidance from her caseworker, they created a small art corner in her room stocked with paper, crayons, and paints. Each evening, they spent a few minutes admiring her artwork and asking about what she created. Over time, the routine became a comforting ritual. The consistent attention helped Mila feel safe, valued, and more open in expressing herself. A simple, positive experience that made a lasting impact. So essentially, Mila began to feel safe, right? She felt valued and very proud of the work that she was doing. This very simple act of even just noticing her strength and making the space for it helped her heal and open up. So that's really the power, right, of a positive experience. It's not complicated, it's connection. I this example makes me think of a video that went viral recently of a parent who threw a art gallery exhibit for their like 4-year-old child's artwork and quite literally set up a little gallery on the wall and had friends come by and admire the artwork and just think about how that can make a child feel and have them feel pride in the work that they do. So, as a reflection, I'd love for you to take a minute and reflect. So, think about a time when recognizing a child's interests or strengths helped build trust. What happened? What was the result? So, for example, maybe it was a child who finally smiled during a home visit, or maybe a parent who started to engage more once you pointed out something that they were actually doing well. Feel free to share in the chat if you want, or just take a quiet moment to think about it. I really believe that these reflections remind us that the work that we do, even when it's hard, can really plant these seeds of healing that can grow over time. All right, so now that we've talked about positive childhood experiences, let's move into our next topic, which is post-traumatic growth, or PTG for short. This section is personally one of my favorites because it's about transformation, how people find new strengths, new meaning, and sometimes even new opportunities or purpose after something very, very difficult. So, post-traumatic growth doesn't mean we're glad something painful happened. It's not about minimizing the trauma either. It's about how over time people can adapt and rebuild, and sometimes even emerge with a deeper understanding of themselves and others around them. So, what exactly is post traumatic growth? It's the positive psychological change that can occur after experiencing trauma or adversity. And that change can show up in many ways. For example, maybe it's new priorities in life, or stronger relationships, or a deeper appreciation for life. The key here really is that post-traumatic growth doesn't focus on getting over the trauma. It focuses on how someone's thinking and outlook can evolve because of what they've endured. So, resilience is about bouncing back to where you were, whereas post-traumatic growth is about moving forward, finding a new way to live or think that didn't necessarily exist before. And that's something we see all the time in child welfare work, right? Families, children, even professionals discovering unexpected strengths through their struggle. Before we dive a little bit deeper, I just want to clear up a couple misconceptions about post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is not about being over it, right? It's not about pretending that everything is fine or pushing people to find a silver lining right away. That kind of pressure can actually harm recovery. And it's also what we call like toxic positivity. So what post-traumatic growth really is a process that unfolds over time. It's something that can coexist with pain, coexist with grief, and even ongoing PTSD. So a person can be struggling and still growing. Those two things are not necessarily opposites. As child welfare professionals, I think it's important that we hold space for both, right? The hurt and the healing, without rushing people toward being okay. One thing I always like to emphasize is that post-traumatic growth doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey, it's a long process. It often begins with disruption, so a traumatic event that shakes someone's core beliefs or worldview. Then the next step is struggle. So they might experience confusion, anger, or pain as they try to make sense of what happened to them. And over time, with reflection and support, people begin to create new meaning, and a sense of growth will then emerge. So it's a process of rebuilding, emotionally, psychologically, and sometimes even spiritually. And as we know in this field, that process looks different for everyone, and that's okay. There are 5 common phases of post-traumatic growth. The first is education, so helping someone understand trauma and realize their reactions are normal. That step alone can reduce shame and bring hope. Then there's regulation, so learning how to calm the body and manage distress through grounding, mindfulness, and self-care. Next comes disclosure, so safely sharing their story with maybe a therapist or a support group, or a trusted person. This step really builds connection and validation for the individual. Story follows. So when someone begins to reshape their personal narrative, seeing themselves not just as a victim, but as someone who has endured and grown. And then finally, service. So this is where they channel their experience into helping others or finding a new sense of purpose. These phases don't always happen in that specific order, but they give us kind of a framework for how growth can unfold over time. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this next question. Out of these 5 phases, education, regulation, disclosure, story, or service, which do you think is most challenging to support in child welfare work and why? Feel free to share in the chat if you'd like, or just reflect on this. For some of us, it's maybe helping children feel safe enough to share their story. That can be a struggle. For other people, it could also be guiding caregivers toward emotional regulation or understanding meaning making. Every single one of these phases comes with its own challenges. Um, so really, there's no right or wrong answer to what you see in your own work. So what actually supports growth? Um, Post-traumatic growth is a deeply personal journey, right? But research shows that post-traumatic growth happens when people have both internal resources and supportive environments outside of themselves. So things like feeling emotionally connected to others, being able to express emotions openly, and having safe opportunities to tell their story, all of these matter. Cognitive processing is also key, reflecting, journaling, or reworking maybe some old beliefs to make sense of the trauma and adversity. And on a personal level, feeling safe, practicing self-compassion, and healing at your own pace, those all set the stage for growth. As professionals, we can't make growth happen in our clients, but we can at least help try to build and create the conditions that make it possible for them to grow. So here's something pretty powerful to remember. Growth doesn't come from the trauma, it comes from struggling with the trauma. So it's the meaning making, it's the reflection, it's the rebuilding that really fuels growth. People often describe a moment when they realize, I can't change what happened, but I can decide what it means for me. That shift from why me to what now is what kind of sparks the growth, if that makes sense. So I've mentioned meaning making a few times. Meaning making is really at the heart of post-traumatic growth. After trauma, a person's sense of identity, safety, or even the worldview can feel shattered. So they might start asking, why did this happen? What does it say about me? How do I move forward? And through reflection, storytelling, or therapy, people begin to find the answers to those questions that help rebuild their sense of self. Narratives that support growth often include a few key pieces. So there's the acknowledgement of pain, the recognition of personal strengths, having a sense of purpose, and awareness of how they've changed. As professionals, helping clients reframe their story, even gently, can be one of the most healing things that we can do. So research shows us that post-traumatic growth often shows up in five main areas. The first is improved relationships. So people may feel closer to others, more empathetic, or more appreciative of the support that they're receiving. The next is new possibilities. So exploring new paths, excuse me, interests or goals that they might not have before the traumatic experience. The next one is personal strength. So realizing their own resilience and their own capacity to overcome challenges. Next, we have spiritual or existential growth. So this can look like a deeper sense of meaning, a deeper sense of purpose, or connection to something greater. And last, we have the appreciation of life. When we say appreciation of life, it's that renewed gratitude for small moments. It can also look like mindfulness and living with intention. So, again, even though there are these five areas of growth, they don't erase the pain, but they help show us that what's possible on the other side of the pain. Much of the early research on post-traumatic growth has focused on adults, but we're now seeing how it applies to children and families, and also specifically in child welfare. So studies are showing that post-traumatic growth can help buffer the long-term effects of maltreatment and also strengthen emotional resilience. For children and families involved in the system, growth can look like rebuilding trust, finding stability, or discovering their own strength after years of hardship. And it's not just the families who experience it. Sometimes we, as the professionals, do too, through the relationships we build and the meaning that we find in helping others heal. Take a moment to reflect. When you're supporting children and families, how can you tell when growth is beginning to happen? What are the small signs that you notice? You can share in the chat or just think about it on your own. Some examples could be when a caregiver starts to express hope again, or a child takes a small risk to trust someone new. Yep, making eye contact, huge, huge. So these really subtle moments of openness or curiosity, or even just connection, those are often the first signs that growth is starting to take root. So in adults with a history of maltreatment, post-traumatic growth can look like three key things. First, reframing their life story. So shifting from seeing themselves as maybe damaged to seeing themselves as survivors with purpose and insight. I used to work with adults with substance use disorders, and for me, that was a huge part of my clients' recovery was when they had this moment of recognizing that everything that I've been through has given me a knowledge that a lot of other people won't understand. And I even had clients who ended up going back and sharing their stories with younger people who were struggling with the same addiction problems as them. And that was their way of sharing their insight and also reframing how they used to view their struggles. Second is strengthening relationships. So, developing deeper, more meaningful connections with others after healing from trauma. And third is recognizing internal strengths. So, noticing resilience, maybe patience, and determination that emerged through recovery. These are the quiet but powerful signs of growth that we can look for in our work with families. So let's take a look at some real life examples. We pulled these from research. We have changed some of the names just for purposes, but first one, Angela, a survivor of gun and domestic violence, became permanently paralyzed after being shot multiple times by her former partner. Supported by hundreds of visitors during recovery, Angela found purpose in advocacy. She now speaks publicly about domestic violence, mental health, and gun violence, using her story to raise awareness and empower others. Chelsea experienced homelessness for much of her adolescence, often hiding it from peers while living in a car with her mother. Through after-school programs and connections with teachers and counselors, she found hope and pathways to college and a military career. Today, she supports youth experiencing homelessness, using her story to show what's possible with resilience and support. And Andrew Bottrell, a Navy veteran, experienced devastating injuries in an explosion, resulting in a double leg amputation and the loss of his left arm. Despite developing PTSD, his participation in the Warrior Path program helped him transform his pain into purpose by supporting fellow veterans through recovery and post-traumatic growth. So all three of these stories are incredible examples of post-traumatic growth, of people who didn't just survive, but they actually chose to grow from their experiences. Before we wrap up post-traumatic growth, I want to invite you to think about an example of growth you've seen in your work. Maybe it was a child who began to find their voice, or a parent who started to rebuild confidence after losing custody. What does that growth look like? And most importantly, how did it impact you? Not just professionally, but also personally, watching that growth of your clients take form. How did that make you feel? Feel free to share in the chat or just reflect quietly. Um, Sometimes these moments remind us why we do this work in the first place. Well, remember that feeling as we move forward into the next section. Our last section of this webinar is going to be on compassion satisfaction. This one is actually about all of you, the helpers, the advocates, the ones that are showing up every day in really, really hard spaces. In child welfare, we spend a lot of time talking about burnout and compassion fatigue, and for good reason, right? But compassion satisfaction is the other side of that story, right? It's the good that comes from this work. It's the moments that refill our tank and remind us why we do it. It's the sense of fulfillment and the pride that comes from making a difference even when the work is tough. Compassion satisfaction is that positive feeling you get when you know that your work really matters. It's when you see a parent reunited with their child, or when a teenager you've supported finally starts believing in themselves. And you realize to yourself that I helped make that possible. I was a piece in that puzzle to watch them thrive. It's that deep sense of purpose and energy that keeps so many people in this field for the long haul. Research kind of describes it as the reward that protects us from burnout, the joy and pride that comes from doing your job well and knowing that you've made a difference. It's not about ignoring what's hard, because this is hard work, but it's about remembering what's meaningful in this work. To show compassion means we see someone struggling and that we want to help. Compassion satisfaction is what follows that. It's the fulfillment, the sense of pride that comes from being there for someone in a very meaningful way. And this isn't just a feel good concept. Research shows that when we experience compassion satisfaction, it helps us manage stress more effectively and bounce back faster from tough experiences. So, some research has found that it even strengthens resilience and social support networks. It's part of what keeps us grounded and connected. So, when you think about what keeps you going in this work, those small wins or those small moments of connection, that's compassion satisfaction in action in your work. Now, I want to make something clear. Compassion fatigue and compassion satisfaction aren't necessarily opposites. So, you can love this work deeply and still feel exhausted. Those two things can absolutely coexist. Compassion fatigue happens when the emotional toll of helping starts to weigh heavy. So, when you're absorbing so much of other people's pain that it starts to feel like your own pain, maybe you're feeling overwhelmed by what your clients are going through. Compassion satisfaction, on the other hand, is what helps buffer that fatigue. It's the reminder that, yes, this work is hard, but it's also profoundly meaningful. Both of these concepts are part of the reality of working in child welfare. The goal isn't to avoid fatigue altogether, it's to intentionally nurture the parts that keep us fueled. And science actually backs this up. So, people who experience higher compassion satisfaction show better job performance, lower turnover, and higher empathy. It acts kind of like a protective layer. The more fulfilled you feel in your role, the more resilient you become when things get tough. It's kind of like an emotional armor, but instead of shutting you off from others, it keeps you open, connected, and strong. So, compassion satisfaction doesn't just feel good, it's good for you. Let's try to kind of ground this concept in real life examples. So, a case manager who mentors new staff and rediscovers purpose through teaching, or a foster parent who stays connected with a child's biological family after reunification, or a supervisor who highlights team successes during tough weeks. These are kind of everyday examples of how helping others can refill our own compassion tanks. Of course, as we all know, there are real barriers that can get in the way of feeling that sense of fulfillment. Things like feeling undervalued, chronic exposure to trauma, heavy caseloads, or lack of support can make it hard to stay connected to your purpose. Acknowledging these barriers isn't complaining, right? It's honest reflection of the tough work. We can't strengthen compassion satisfaction without naming what gets in the way first. When we validate the challenges, we create space for realistic, compassionate self care. And that's what helps us sustain ourselves in the long term. So let's talk about some brief practical ways to strengthen compassion satisfaction. Taking intentional breaks to reset, even if it's just 5 minutes, can make a difference. Connect with people that you trust, so peers or supervisors or friends who just get it, who understand. Taking care of your body, utilizing rest, hydrating, movement. It really matters more than we give it credit for. Sharing your experiences, so talking about the hard and the hopeful, kind of keeps things in perspective. Limit exposure to upsetting media when you're off work. So try to give your nervous system space to rest. I know sometimes that's easier said than done. Stick to daily routines. This can help, this kind of consistency can help create a calm. And don't hesitate to reach out for support when you need it. The goal isn't necessarily perfection, right? We all know perfection doesn't exist. It's balance. It's giving yourself the same compassion that you give to others every day. Take a moment to think of one moment when your work made a difference. This can be big or small. Maybe it was helping a parent reunify with their child. Maybe it was a teenager finally opening up after months and months of silence. How did that moment ripple outward? Did it impact the child, the family, or even like your whole team? Feel free to share in the chat if you'd like. I think that these ripples remind us that even the smallest acts can have a really lasting impact, far beyond what we might even see in our work with those clients. Oh, wow. I had a family reach out on adoption day 10 months after I had worked with them. It's amazing. Advocating for sibling to move together despite others disagreeing. We got them to love, live together, and this changed the younger child so much that she started talking. It's beautiful. Thank you, Rachel and Ashley. I want to share just a couple mindset shifts that can kind of help reframe how we experience our stress. So let's say, for example, instead of saying, I'm exhausted from caring, we can remind ourselves that I'm honored that people trust me with their stories. Instead of saying something like, this work never ends, maybe we say, Every effort I make adds to a chain of care that extends beyond me. Reframing, there are decades and decades of research on how this can benefit us and change our mood, our positivity. But I also want to state that reframing isn't about ignoring the challenges, right? It's not trying to be living in the oblivious area, right? It's about grounding ourselves in the meaning behind the challenges. When we see our work as part of something larger, something that really connects and heals, like the examples in the chat, it helps restore our sense of purpose. Here's another reflection. I love self-reflection. What helps refill your compassion tank? So some examples are spending time with loved ones or being in nature, listening to your favorite band, faith, movement. These are all examples of things that can keep you grounded. And I want you to think about one small thing you can do this week to nurture your sense of purpose. Some small examples could be sending a thank you note to a coworker, taking a real lunch break, like a real one, you know what I mean, or celebrating a small success. There's lots of different approaches to this. Feel free to share in the chat. It's possible that your ideas might inspire someone else. Yeah, nature is a big one for me too. I think someone's typing, but we're going to keep moving because we're almost done. Oh, I'm going to share that out loud. We have a kudos board that everyone can give positive feedback to coworkers, and it's nice to see the support. I love that idea. Helps build connection too among your colleagues, which is great. So let's just take a quick moment to summarize. Today in the webinar, we started with positive childhood experiences. So these are the protective factors that help children thrive. Then we explored post-traumatic growth, the ways that people can transform and find meaning after hardship. And last, we covered compassion satisfaction. So this, the fulfillment that keeps us going as we support others through their own journeys. These three concepts work together. PACEs help prevent harm, post-traumatic growth shows how healing can happen, and compassion satisfaction helps sustain the helpers doing the work. This booster course builds on what you learned in STARS, or if you haven't taken STARS yet, it will build on to what you learned. Shifting from focusing only on adversity to also recognizing growth and hope for the children and families that you serve, and also for yourself. As child welfare professionals, you see the effects of trauma every day, but you also get to witness moments of courage and strength and healing. Remember that this work isn't just about managing trauma, it's about nurturing growth and healing also. And if you're a part of that growth, it's something that can transform yourself too, and the way that you view your career and the way that you view your own relationships and success outside of work. So just another reminder to make sure to register for the Stars Booster course. It's coming soon, and it'll take you on an even deeper dive into these topics to enhance your work and well-being. I believe they put something in the chat, a link. And yeah, now I just want to open up to any questions that you might have before we close, or even just reflections if there's something you want to share. Yeah, Rachel, I'm not sure if there is a registration yet, but if you join the mailing list, you could be notified. Zoe might correct me on that.
My camera, there we go. Yeah, the STARS course isn't open for applications right now. I am going to share a link to all of our adcerts, which includes more information on STARS, but the best bet to get information when we do start our next round of applications will be to sign up for our mailing list.
Well, if that's it, thank you all so much for being here and really for the work that you do. It truly matters, and I hope that you at least can take one thing away from this webinar and implement it this week to make yourself feel better and also your clients feel supported and given the opportunity to grow. Thank you guys.
Also would like to have a big thank you to Marina and round of applause for your wonderful presentation today.